School's out and it's almost time for summer camp. I'm Joseph, this is Input English. Today's story for Comprehensible Input is about summer camp. Summer for the boys, for Craig and Bobby, has arrived. They're out of school, they're done, and now it's summertime. The question faced by the family, and faced by many families around the world, is what do you do for children who are no longer occupied by their school days? What do you do to entertain them? What do you do to enrich their lives? And what do you do to provide the appropriate level of care when the parents may be occupied doing other things, like working? The end of the school year was obvious to Kathy and Robert, so they had plenty of time to talk about this. They enlisted the help of the two boys by way of asking the boys what they wanted to do during the summer. Craig was immediately helpful. He wanted to go to Boy Scout camp. Bobby wasn't very helpful. He had no idea what he wanted to do. He wanted to have fun, but other than that, he didn't have a specific plan. In order to satisfy Craig's wish, all they needed to do was register him with the Boy Scout troop to go on the summer camp. Now, that summer camp is only 2 weeks long, and so the rest of the summer will require some thought. But for the 2 weeks of summer camp, Craig would be occupied. Kathy did some research and found an art camp for kids Bobby's age. She looked into it and found that it would probably be a very good activity for Bobby. The Boy Scout camp came first in the summer, and then the art camp that Bobby would attend would be at the end of June. The two boys would not be at their respective camps at the same time. Now, when Craig goes to Boy Scout camp, he will be camping in a tent with the other Boy Scouts and will not come home at night. He will be there around the clock, 24 hours a day for the 2-week period. Bobby, on the other hand, will be coming home because his art camp is only 4 hours per day. Kathy and Robert have talked about taking some time off to go somewhere with the boys in mid to late July, but their plans for this are not firm. They don't have a specific plan. They registered both boys for these summer camps, and soon it was time for Craig to go to Boy Scout camp. Craig had a list of things that he needed to pack, and these were all packed in his Boy Scout backpack. He also had a duffel bag, that is a canvas bag, to carry things that didn't fit in the backpack. The troop was to depart on a Saturday morning early. As usual, the Boy Scout leader came by Craig's house to pick him up because it was his custom to provide Craig a ride because Craig lived on the way to the place of these Boy Scout meetings. Craig loaded his gear into the car and they departed for the Boy Scout camp after Craig had a chance to say goodbye to his parents and his brother. The last thing Kathy said to him as he was getting into the car was, "Be careful, be safe." The scout leaders and all the boys going on the camp assembled in the meeting place in the parking lot of a church in town. They sorted the boys into the various cars and trucks that would be going to the Boy Scout camp. The drive to the camp was about an hour long. It was outside of town. The Boy Scout camp was on a piece of property owned by a fellow who provided access to the camp for the Boy Scouts to use. This parcel of land was on the shore of a very large lake. There was an area that was cleared that was appropriate for the tents to be erected. And nearby that, there were the grills for cooking food and 2 faucets providing clean, fresh water. Away from the cooking area, there were 2 outhouse-type bathrooms. No flush toilets, just an outhouse-type toilet. Not far from the cooking area and the area designated for the tents, there was an area that was similar to an amphitheater. That is, logs had been set up in a semicircle, several rows of logs, and then in front there was a place someone could stand and speak to people sitting on these logs. It was like a miniature theater. Near to there was a covering, a shelter with a roof, but no walls. The roof was supported by poles. There were several picnic tables under that roof. That might come in handy if it rained at mealtime. That way people could go under that roof to get shelter from the rain while they're eating a meal. When they arrived, the Boy Scouts loaded all their gear out of the vehicles and waited for instructions. The assistant scout leader took them over to where they would pitch their tents and showed where the tents would go. Now the tents were in the back of a pickup truck, so the boys had to unload these tents, which were each in a canvas bag. Once the boys had retrieved all these tents, the assistant scout leader showed them where each tent should go, and every 2 boys needed to put up 1 tent because they would be sharing a pup tent. Once each tent was assigned to a specific location, the assistant scout leader demonstrated how to correctly put up the tent and what orientation it should be in. The scout leaders were fairly meticulous. They wanted their Boy Scout camp to look good. They wanted the rows to be straight, and they wanted all the tents to be facing in the same direction. With a little bit of corrective instruction from the assistant scout leader, all the tents were gradually erected in the right place. Some needed to be moved, some needed to be rotated, but eventually the scout leaders got their way. All the tents were erected, they were all lined up in rows and columns, and they were all facing in the same direction. The boys stowed their gear in their tent and deployed their sleeping bags. These activities occupied their entire first morning, and so now it's time for lunch. One of the assistant scout leaders was already cooking burgers and putting out the other food that would make up this meal. When lunch was ready, the boys were called to serve themselves on paper plates, and then they would eat under that shelter roof at the picnic tables. Some of the boys chose to eat out in that semicircle of logs set up as a little amphitheater. When lunch was complete, all the utensils and paper plates were collected and all the cleanup was completed. The boys were told that they were going to start on their activities in the afternoon. They were going to go down to the lake in bathing suits and get familiar with the lake in preparation for the work that they would be doing in the lake during the week. Now, different boys were going to be doing different things. Many of the boys were working on a canoeing merit badge. Others wanted to get their swimming merit badge. A lot of the boys wanted to participate in the mile swim because they wanted that badge too. This first trip down to the lake would just be for familiarization and a little free swimming on their first day of camp. When everyone was ready, they marched down to the lake. What they found was there was no beach, there was no white sand. The grass just ended at the edge of the water, and then there were a lot of weeds stretching out into the water. However, there was a path, a very straight path. It appeared to be created by human effort. There was a very straight path through these weeds leading out to the water and the lake. To the right of the path, there was a structure. It was hard to describe. It wasn't a normal structure. It was made with 6 large poles like telephone poles. These poles were erected vertically in a rectangle, and then about 4 feet above the water, there was a platform. There was no railing. There was one ladder up to that platform, and it was very old. The water under the platform was fairly deep. It was at least 4 feet deep. The scout leaders took the boys out there through this narrow path through the weeds, but unfortunately this assistant scout leader that was leading them created a little bit of fear. He pointed out that the water through which they were walking had a lot of leeches in it, and these leeches might attach to them and try to suck their blood. This caused fear and disgust on the part of most of the boys. There wasn't one boy in the troop that wanted a leech attached to his leg. When all the boys got out to that structure on the pilings, the assistant scout leader gave them a briefing. He told them what they were allowed to do and what they were not allowed to do. He explained that the water was too shallow for them to dive headfirst into the water. He said the absolute rule is no diving headfirst off this structure. He told the boys that they could go up onto the structure, but not too many should get on the structure at one time. He recognized that the platform was old and rickety, and he didn't want it to collapse. With that, the boys started climbing up onto the platform. The first couple of boys to arrive quickly went to the edge and jumped into the water, feet first. This continued. Soon the ladder was a continuous conveyor belt of boys going up onto the platform, walking to the other side, and then jumping feet first as they were instructed into the water. After a relatively short while, there were more boys climbing up the ladder than there were boys jumping into the water, and a lot of boys accumulated on that platform. And as predicted, the platform was not strong enough for all that weight. It squeaked and shook and then collapsed. It didn't fall straight down, it fell down on one side predominantly. The attachments to the 2 end poles on the deep side held. And so the whole platform did not just come down like a pancake, it hinged from the front with the end of the platform closest to the shore hitting the water and going underwater. Unfortunately, there were some boys under the platform when it collapsed. Luckily, the platform did not trap any of the boys. Craig was one of the boys under the platform when it collapsed. He remembers being surprised, being hit in the head by a board and being knocked underwater. He quickly rescued himself, and there was no real major danger. Some of the boys slid down the tilted platform, and a couple of the boys got a couple of big splinters. This was witnessed by the assistant scout leader, who was horrified. They had done exactly what he told them not to do. He also felt guilty that he had not prevented it. In the heat of the moment, his primary concern was the safety of the boys. So he rushed through the water toward this platform. Since the water was 3 to 4 feet deep, he couldn't make much progress trying to walk. So he pitched over forward and started to swim. He swam as fast as he could. When he got to the structure, he started shouting orders to the boys. He wanted to know, is everybody okay? Is anybody still underwater? Is anyone missing? He told the boys to line up very quickly so he could do a head count. Quickly, he went down the row and satisfied himself. All the boys were accounted for. He then looked for evidence of injury, and he could see none. He then told the boys that it was time to go back to camp so that they could discuss this, turn it into a good learning experience, and make sure that he hadn't missed any injuries. With that, all the boys lined up and started their trek back through this man-made path, through the weeds, through the muddy water that might contain leeches, and they made their way back to camp. When they got back to camp, the scout leader greeted them and wanted to know what was going on. He had a brief discussion with the assistant scout leader, and this was out of earshot of the boys. The boys didn't know exactly what was said, but they could see that there was a lot of nodding and a little bit of finger pointing, but it didn't look like either the assistant scout leader or the scoutmaster were upset in a big way. At this point, the assistant scout leader led them to something they didn't know about, which was an outdoor shower with a cement pad so that they could rinse off and then dry with a towel. The boys lined up and took their turn rinsing the lake water off of them and then drying with their towel. It was at this point that several boys found that they had leeches on their legs. Little slippery black things, very narrow, very much alive, and these leeches were attached to their leg, to the skin of their leg. Each of the leeches, once identified, was pulled off the skin. When the leech released, a little bit of blood came out of the boy's leg, but there was no major wound. It was just a little bit of blood, and it quit bleeding pretty quickly. Now it was time for all the boys to get into dry clothes and assemble at the semicircle so that the scout leader can explain what went wrong and how they're going to be safer during the rest of their summer camp. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.